Yeah, I just gotta help him more. I feel like I'm letting him down, so I gotta be there. I gotta help him more. He's giving everything that he has, and he's been amazing for us the whole series.
Welcome to Inside the Mavs right here on Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube live as we react to game number 4 between the Mavericks and the Clippers. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining us here on Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. And if you're watching this, you can like and comment on the video and subscribe to Kevin Gray Sports. And also, if you're listening to it on the podcast, once that comes out, of course, you can download and subscribe to Inside the Mavs wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast for free. Joining me here, of course, on the show, as he does every single episode here, Grant Afseth of Mavs Sports Illustrated joining me here on the show as we get ready to discuss what happened in game number 4 between the Mavericks and the Clippers. Grant, what's going on?
I'm doing pretty good. Definitely going to be looking forward to talking about this game for sure.
Oh boy, what a game it was. The Mavericks fall 116 to 111 to the Los Angeles Clippers in game 4 as a 31-point comeback ultimately falls short in game 4 after the Mavericks were down by 31 points at 55 to 24 with 5:43 left in the second quarter. But the Mavericks staged what was an incredible comeback to eventually take the lead on a Kyrie Irving layup that came with a $155, or excuse me, with about 2:15 left in the game. But then the Clippers would outscore the Mavericks 12-6 in the final minute and 55 seconds, and namely in part to Paul George and James Harden. Paul George hitting a three-pointer, a tough three-pointer in the right corner that gave the Clippers a lead that they would not relinquish, and James Harden found himself getting easy buckets at the end of the game to be able to help seal it for the Clippers. Before we dive into the specifics of what happened in the game, tell me just your overall thoughts on how everything went down. You were, of course, at the American Airlines Center watching this unfold, and what your thoughts were basically on how this thing went down at the AAC.
Yeah, it was an extremely flat start, giving up, I believe, 39 first quarter points, scoring 16. It reminded me a lot of that game 1 of the series where Kawhi Leonard also didn't play. The Mavericks had a very rough first half, scoring only 30 points, in the first half of that game. And, having the short notice of not really knowing Kawhi Leonard is fully going to be out before game day, and Lawrence Frank addressing the media before the coaches even talked pregame. That's how close, to tip off about 2 hours before the game that the team actually knew that Kawhi Leonard, wasn't going to play based off of reporting. So, definitely still think they should have been more prepared considering they faced this situation, in game 1, but definitely a very interesting overall day where, that news gets dropped after Kawhi being designated as questionable and then all of a sudden being shut down. And then you just knew that the Clippers were going to be aggressive like they were in that game 1. But this time, after already winning game 1, there's a little more to it than that, where they know, obviously all these athletes are going to be very, confident, but they are more than, going to be confident and have that formula in the back of their minds, knowing that they can, take a game on the road, head back to LA and, have a tied series with home court advantage, with the lead of Paul George being aggressive, James Harden being aggressive. And, they definitely did that the whole first half. Those guys were dominant. The Mavericks, tried to adjust in the second half, but, the damage was already done when you're down 31. I know they did rally back and they took that lead late, but they basically put themselves in the position to have to play perfect down the stretch. And you can't expect perfect in the playoffs.
Yeah, the Clippers in that first quarter wound up going on what would be a 31-6 run in that first quarter to get themselves up by 23 at the end of one, at 39-16. And you talked about it and started to mention it. The aggressiveness of Paul George at the outset of game 4 was evident. You look at what George was able to do, in that first quarter, really setting the tone from an offensive standpoint with the 16 points that he had. And what surprised me most, and not necessarily the fact that the Clippers know how to make threes is that it was at the rate at which they made their threes in that first quarter. In fact, going 8 of 11 from downtown in that first quarter. Norman Powell ending the first quarter with a buzzer beater three-pointer that increased the lead to 23. It was just something that the Clippers found themselves executing offensively early and often, but most importantly, they were hot from distance, which we know that they're capable of based on the fact that they were 6th in the NBA this season, shooting the three-point shot at 38%. They came out extremely hot in that first quarter with the offensive execution that they had.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you let Paul George get on a heater and then other role players, around him are making shots too. And James Harden's dishing out the ball, getting assists, and he's scoring as well too. That's a pretty rough overall makeup for your team, especially when they kind of have that feeling of, we have nothing to lose. Like, we're just going to go out there and gun for it. We have to step up. We have to be on our A game. And it was kind of interesting because that's what Jason Kidd, said before the game. We have to be on our A game, even though they don't have Kawhi. And they definitely, the Mavericks were definitely not on their A game throughout that first half for sure.
Yeah, it was just tough to watch because, you allow the Clippers to really get off to a hot start. They scored 39 points in that first quarter, up by 23. You look at the offensive numbers, as I mentioned, went 8 of 11 from downtown, went 13 of 20 overall from the field at a 65% clip. And then in the Mavericks started 0 of 7 from 3 in that first quarter, went 0 of 7 from 3 in that first quarter, and was just 4 of 16 overall. You're not going to win many ball games or get off to a good start by shooting that poorly in a game. And that's what it felt like it was. Just the Clippers just shooting the lights out from 3 and the Mavericks' inability to get going offensively early. And one of the things that we knew coming into this game was that Luka Doncic was going to be questionable, with the knee soreness that he's dealing with in his right knee. And even though he finished with the triple-double, you could tell throughout the course of the game, I'm sure you could tell, obviously being there at the arena, that his leg is obviously bothering him a lot more than probably what he wants to let on. He was able to discuss a little bit of that during the post-game presser, saying that obviously it hurts. But there were points in this game where you could tell, and we'll get into more of it as we go on, particularly in the fourth quarter, where it was really hampering him, especially on the defensive end, even though he was able to get some of it going a little bit more in the second half. What did you notice from Dončić in terms of not just his performance, but how he looked on the floor as he progressed through the game?
Yeah, I definitely think it was bothering him. He's someone that's always going to power through stuff if it's physically possible. But something I did catch, during the time when Derek Jones went to the locker room and came back, I was kind of keeping an eye on Derek Jones and just noticed the bench. And Luka was getting his knee checked out during a timeout, and he's got that thing wrapped, probably with a brace or something like that. And he's been using that since this became an issue. So definitely something that's limiting him. And I think overall the pressure of getting to the rim is probably at its highest that he's faced in his postseason career, based off of previous configurations of the roster with a lot of shooting. So he needs to basically be at his best and bring the most to get to the rim. Compared to the past. And physically, I think he's probably the least equipped considering the injury that he's playing through. And that's, definitely a challenge, right now. Because, before this game even happened, I was seeing in the half court, like he was getting shots at the rim were accounting for like 6% of his field goal attempts in this series. And, I'm actually going to go grab that number real fast for us because I'm very curious what it's at now. So the shot profile, let's take a look here. So in this series, at the rim, they account for 10.2% of his shot attempts in the half court. He's taken a total of, he's taken a total of, in the playoffs, he's gotten, particularly at the rim, 9 field goal attempts in this series so far. So 4 games, like that's a very low number, and a lot of reliance on those short range jump shots, mid range jump shots that he's going to have to take when he's getting downhill, more than you typically see from him. Usually those are deeper attempts, and he's got a rhythm going in those, those approaches. Like it's like attacking a small and he's taking a turnaround, or getting to a spot and just raising up and shooting like deeper on those drives, not necessarily like around the elbow and having to, take a tough step back and face the contact and be pressured and all that stuff as well too. But overall, like, he hasn't been converting on the catch and shoot attempts either. That could be a way to, alleviate some pressure for himself, like play within the flow a little bit. But when you're not hitting those shots either, that's tough. And just for, the perspective, his half court shooting profile, he's shooting almost 80% of his shots as off the dribble jump shots. He's shooting 70.9% to be exact, after game 4. So that's, a ton of tough shots that you're trying to live with. And if that's not falling and you're not getting to the rim, it's going to be a very challenging, set of circumstances to overcome as a scorer.
Yeah, and then you're dealing with a leg injury on top of all that, affecting the jump shot. So if you're going to be taking that amount of mid-range jump shots, they're not falling, and you're dealing with the injury, it's not a recipe for a lot of success when it comes to the efficiency at which we know that Luka Doncic is capable of. But that's an alarming number in terms of the 9 field goals when it comes to at the rim, because we know that Luka Doncic is a fantastic 3-level scorer, primarily loves to get to the rim, but the Clippers have made it extremely difficult for him so far in this series, and that he's not been able to have the kind of efficiency that we've seen from him. So that could give you a really indication, if you're watching the series, on why Luka may be struggling as much as he is, because he's not getting to the rim as a customer as he normally does, throughout the course of a game, which at times can bottle things up and not make things easier for other guys, because the reliance on Luka's ability to get to the rim, not only for a score for himself, but really to make other plays for other guys as well, it makes it a lot more difficult. And you saw a lot of that in the first half. The Mavericks were starting to able to get things going, but for what you saw, what changed for the Mavericks? We mentioned down by 23 going into the second quarter. Then they were able to start to turn things up after that particular portion there, where Kyrie Irving really in that second half of that second quarter started to get things going offensively for the Mavericks in that way.
Yeah, I think that was definitely it. He just took matters into his own hands. He hit a couple, he hit that really momentum shifting pull up 3 in transition. He made some really tough plays. He had that, he hesitated and then, fooled the defense, made a play, attacking, as well too. Overall, just a lot of plays from him that were really, definitely the Kyrie Irving plays you would expect when he's got to dial it up and really, elevate his performance. And that's where it's just really difficult, because they don't have right now that third option that they can turn to when one of those top guys really dials it up. And that's kind of why, this isn't shade at anybody or anything.
Sure.
That's why you can't count on centers that are relying on Luka Doncic to be your third scorer if Luka Doncic can't create for them at that typical level in the postseason. Like in the regular season, I do see that as you can get a lot of production out of that. But right now, there's not that option where they can really just dump the ball to, let him get off the ball, and then it's not someone named Kyrie Irving to make a play. PJ Washington can make some of those plays. He had that transition, and one where he just did a grab and go. But in the half court, when things are bogged down, you don't really have that off the dribble shooting threat that can just stop on a dime, create a shot, use a ball screen, take a pull up, things like that. There's a lot of I guess you could say reliance on Luka, as we've discussed a lot, throughout, covering this team, where, Kyrie Irving makes a big impact for sure, but you still need a little bit more from those other players if you're going to not get Luka Doncic's, A game, if you will, or his at least 90%, 85% of what he would normally do, because the margin for error in the playoffs is very thin, and you're asking a lot from 2 superstars, and should he be able to provide that when you're really gearing up physically, if he's capable, I would definitely, expect it. But you got to almost prepare for, adversity, like the Clippers are prepared. They have other options that have proven they can win playoff games, as we've seen in the series, when one of their guys isn't even playing, their main guy isn't playing. So I think that's kind of there's been a lot of quality measures taken by the roster, the front office with the roster building efforts. But I do think that's right now where you're just seeing that still that really heavy dependence. And there may not really be a great obvious solution to that when you are already, kind of invested in some of those options. But, that's not talk that we need to have while we're discussing the playoff series that's 2-2. We don't need to fire up the NBA 2K GM mode. But overall, definitely something to watch throughout the rest of this series is just, how the Clippers they have their identity that they can turn to because they are used to playing without Kawhi Leonard. He did play a lot of games this year, but in the past couple of years, I know James Harden's new, but Paul George is no stranger to having to elevate his game in the postseason without Kawhi Leonard. So definitely, the Mavericks are going to have to try to figure out on the fly how to make things a little easier in the half court, like how willing they're able to get, to do that. And this is actually what we discussed on this last episode is we knew, the Clippers are going to find new weak points. They're going to find different approaches, and they exploited that. And, the quick turnaround, who knows, maybe that could have been, a factor, early afternoon game, 1 day off, but now there's going to be 2 days off, and there should be enough time to really gear up for that game 5. So I'm definitely intrigued to see what those countermeasures are going to be.
Yeah, and during that run that we mentioned, the Mavericks went on a 37-16 run after being down 55-24 with 5:43 left in that second quarter. They went 15 of 18 in that span. Kyrie Irving had 22 of those 36 points to eventually cut the lead down to 10. And of course, as we go on, we'll describe obviously how the Mavericks were able to eventually take a lead. But I've been struck by, it's so odd because in the 2 games that the Mavericks have won so far in this series, Kawhi Leonard was playing. The 2 games that they've lost in the series, Kawhi Leonard wasn't playing. And I thought, watching the Clippers, they played with much more flow, much more rhythm. I thought the ball moved a lot more. Yes, Paul George and James Harden were doing a majority of the scoring, but you saw others get involved. And one of the things I had said during the pregame show was, some of the others, you saw Norman Powell had 21 points in game 3. He was able to play really well. But I thought that they needed some more from a guy like Terrence Mann as well, who's been obviously the primary defensive assignment, on Luka Doncic. But even in game number 4, he was able to contribute with double-digit points. He had 11 points. Norman Powell had another 11 points. Ivica Zubac had 13. So you saw some of the other guys be able to contribute where, one of the adjustments that Ty Lue made was that he shortened his rotation. You saw what he had. He only played 8 guys as far as his rotation was concerned. Other than the starting 5, it was only Norman Powell, Russell Westbrook, and Mason Plumlee who played 14 minutes. I think one of the adjustments that he made was, look, we're going to take a lot of threes. We're going to try to make a bunch of threes, but we're also going to continue to keep our our rotation short, and it worked out well. But I thought some of the others for the Clippers really made an impact because, Paul George and James Harden know what it's like to be in these moments, and you mentioned it with George having to step up and elevate his game, in the absences, of Kawhi Leonard, and both him and Harden did that, combining for 66 of what was the 116 points in this game. I thought both of them, especially down the stretch after the Mavericks were able to make that comeback, really were able to stabilize things later on in the fourth quarter. What you saw from those two, how did that impact what the Mavericks were trying to do defensively based on them not having Kawhi Leonard in this game here?
Yeah, I think in the first half, it sounds a little cliche, but I think they just lost track of Paul George way too often. Like there were times where he was,
which is something you can't do.
Yeah,
you cannot do that.
Like I know he's got like a lot more to his arsenal and his offensive skill set than just like catch, shoot threes. But he is one of the, like if you look at statistically, he is one of the most prolific 3-point shooters like in NBA history. Like he's phenomenal. Like he's a high volume, high accuracy guy who he just needs a split second to, get it off, and he's going to, knock down at a high clip, when he's on. Like, and once he gets going, it's very tough to stop him. So I think, he gets confidence, starts attacking downhill, and, he is also someone that has that, that cliche 3-level scorer ability. He can stop on the drive, pull up, and knock down shots over you. So with that 6'9" height, he's a very difficult player to handle, and he set the tone in the first half. And then, I think overall they just really saw the Mavericks game plan from this whole series, and they just took advantage of it. They knew what they were going to get when it was winning time. It's like Jamal Murray, like this is a very random reference, but I just remember seeing this. Like Jamal Murray said in a clip, if I'm going for a game winner, I'm always going mid-range. Like that kind of reminded me of James Harden's approach today. Like he knew what he was going to get because the defense was going to give it up, and that was floaters. He knew he'd get downhill deep, and with his ability, also his reputation, the defense has to respect the threat of him throwing the late lob. Like he is one of the best, at that ability. And that really put like a guy like Maxi Kleber in a tough spot where it's like, do I stay attached to the big? Even if I step up just enough, a little bit, that late lob is going to come and I'm going to, give up 2 points. So it's like, do I give up the finish by the big on the late lob that James Harden is extremely effective at, making that pass? Or do I take that risk, get more into the ball, get vertical, and hope that he misses this like lower percentage floater shot? And that's kind of the calculus that they put into it. Whether you or I agree with it, it doesn't matter. That's the approach that they took. And that's just kind of like, like a lot of people were confused, I saw, like about why they, took that like certain approach, why stuff happened the way it did. And that's basically like the overall like calculus that went into that. And then on the other side of the ball, for everything that we've discussed with their struggles offensively, that like I know people will say, Maxi Kleber, obviously he's not going to be like that high volume, like just sharpshooter. But the fact that he's going to stand on the wing and you have to at least somewhat respect it, even a little bit, is more spacing than you would get from that 5 who's standing in the dunker spot, and they're going to not give up the pick and roll actions and clutch time anyways. And so I'm not saying I agree with it. It doesn't even matter what I think, but like overall, like that's just the overall, like, why certain things happen the way they happen, sort of explanation. So that's kind of the choices they made. The results they got was James Harden went on a heater to close the game. And so Paul George set the table early, and, James Harden closed out the game. So that was definitely, well, not just James Harden. Paul George had that pivotal, corner 3, really tough shot, fading in the corner, and he made some. I believe he had at least like a one trip to the free throw line as well too, to add, in an important moment as well too. So both guys delivered when they needed to. I know he missed. I think he split the free throws if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
he overall those guys both contributed scoring when they needed in clutch time.
Yeah, and one of the things you started to touch on was the fact that, for a lot of Mavericks fans who are watching the game and folks who were observing the game, especially as we got deeper into the fourth quarter, because again, Mavericks made this epic comeback. Luka ties the game at 98. They eventually take the lead on an amazing layup by Kyrie Irving. They get up, and able to take the lead there. And you're thinking, okay, with 2 minutes and 15 seconds left, the Mavericks have given themselves, they've made this incredible comeback. They've expended all this energy to make this comeback, knocking down threes and getting themselves to this point. And then as the final, 2 minutes of the game plays out, one of the things, and it really started to happen throughout the course of the fourth quarter, the Clippers made the decision that, okay, Luka, who had gotten into early foul trouble in the game, and then later on, as we're into the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, he's got 5 fouls. So you're thinking, okay, the Clippers are going to attack Luka over and over and over again, which they did. They also did the same on PJ Washington. They did the same on Maxi Kleber as well. But they utilized James Harden to get downhill and attack them. And you could tell not only with the injury that Luka's dealing with in terms of the leg injury, but also not obviously wanting to pick up that 6th foul either. They utilized that aggressiveness. And I thought, and I want your opinion on this, because the way that I felt about it was, okay, yes, you have Maxi Kleber on the floor for the spacing element to be able to knock down shots, to keep things spread out, because you don't want to get things bogged down with either Lively or Gafford in the middle there. But I thought that maybe you could find a way to make some substitutions, offense for defense. I know timeouts were starting to run out as the game was winding down as well. But I thought that Jason Kidd didn't give himself and his team an opportunity to try and stop some of that bleeding by just allowing Harden over and over and over again to get into the paint, where he was devastating them with the floaters that he was making. What did you think about that particular strategy, given the fact that what Kidd explained after the game, not wanting to give up, the 3-pointers to Harden, but also at the same time, he was getting a lot of easy baskets with that floater in the middle of the lane there. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple layers to it. I think the Clippers, every element of that, my guess is just based off comments, which are, in the playoffs, like they're not going to tell you everything they know, obviously, but they seem very aware of the fact that the Mavericks love to do certain things, which is one of them is close games with Maxi Kleber at the 5. Like that was something that was brought up earlier in the series of like, oh, what do you think about this lineup that they have with PJ Washington, Maxi Kleber? It's such a positive, and then Lively and Gafford are negatives on the court. Do you think they're going to use it more? Like that was something that they're very well aware of, and they knew they had to, prepare for, have counters for. And, as a game 4 is played out towards the very end of the stage, that's a good amount of opportunity to familiarize, really hone in on details. And so not only did they know, I'm sure, I'm only guessing, the lineup that was going to be used, they knew the approach schematically, the defensive coverages that were going to be used. And that's why James Harden kept, I guess you could say, spamming the same, same approach. So that's why you usually say, we have a lot of cliche bring ups on this one by me, but give them different doses, give them different looks,
sure.
Let them see the same thing over and over again. And obviously this is armchair, analysis here, but for me, I feel like with the way teams usually approach Kyrie Irving, either we're going to just straight up blitz him and get the ball out of his hands, or we're going to let him face, an actual just neutral coverage. I feel like I would want my big on the court if I was kind of, pushing buttons in this instance, because if you do get Kyrie and you have the ball in his hands and you have a big, you at least have more of a finishing threat on one end. And you can, if they do play neutral approach, I'm going to, count on Kyrie making plays, neutral pick and roll action. That's, you can even run some other stuff. So, not to even say it's your only option, but you can at least get Luka off the ball if he's really at this point he wasn't making shots in the fourth quarter, so maybe you want him to be a little more of a decoy. But if they do blitz Kyrie and you have the ball in his hands, then you are still getting that advantage basketball. And we've come to trust, I know it's a lot of pressure on a 20-year-old, but whether it's Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford, I feel like you can at least trust the short roll decision making in that instance. And if you are going to be able to do that, and you're playing a 4-on-3 situation where you can count on that a little bit more to, mix it up offensively, but also have that length, because you have someone who's 7'1", with a 7'7" wingspan as one option, and with Derek Lively. And then you also have Daniel Gafford, who's got length and athleticism as well too, to at least maybe lunge at Harden and make him think twice and have more of that threat to, maybe throw him off a little bit on even a couple of those floaters, who knows, but that's why I wrote a podcast. But that's just kind of my overall thought. It's so much easier to say that though, when we're we saw what happened and we're this decision didn't work because they lost, but what if you did something else? It's it'd be definitely always a different set of circumstances. So I don't want to come off as I know more than the coach running the team, but just some food for thought sort of things where it's if you're at this point of a series, it's kind of fun to think about where you're they probably know what's coming after they've seen that kind of repetitively. In the late regular season, the Mavericks utilized, Maxi Kleber as a closing five a lot too. So there's a lot of track record to know what to expect at the very least. I mean, obviously a lot of these offenses and stuff and defensive coverages, they know that both teams know what it is, the call outs, the counters, all that stuff. And it's still, you still have to go out and execute. So I'm not saying just because they know it's it's doomed, but it's at least in the heat of the moment in a clutch time situation, having someone at least second guess or have to think, might be the better approach. But then again, James Harden shot poorly on floaters before today's game as well too. So he was on a heater after not really making them in previous situations in the series.
Yeah, just thinking about the calculus of the idea that we want James Harden shooting floaters versus step back 3-pointers is kind of wild to think about, because the 3-point shot, especially a step back variety, is a lower percentage shot than you would think of any kind of floater that anyone is shooting, even with the struggles that James Harden has had with those shots. Yet that was the decision that Jason Kidd decided that he wanted to live with, was we'd rather have James Harden taking, floaters versus step back 3-pointers, where he's been as good as he has, especially on that right side where he's been knocking down quite a bit of those throughout the course of the series so far.
But one of the craziest things too, though, is they actually handled guarding him in space pretty well with both of their bigs in stretches, where they've shaded him going to his right. And they no matter how much he retreated back, they were super rigid about not opening up their stance and still forcing him right. And they did a very effective job of that, literally last game prior. So it's just an interesting thing to see how some of that stuff plays out, where it's you can, I made a YouTube video breakdown of it. I'm this is a really good, defensive approach. This was smart. And then it's the next game, it's
get away from it.
It's just a very interesting playoff basketball at its finest.
Yeah, and that's I think what concerned me was they had done a good job on him in game 3. So okay, so what I'm getting to is the idea that I would like to see a little bit more trust in those moments with those bigs to be able to handle that, because they have shown and proven so far that they can handle that in certain situations. And especially when you're getting beat repeatedly over and over again, why not maybe switch that look up a little bit to be able to handle that better down the stretch? I thought that there was an opportunity to do that based on what has happened so far in this series with those bigs being able to defend Harden, that they didn't necessarily do in game 4, especially when they needed to most down the stretch, because at the ease at which James Harden was able to get and break down, Luka and Maxey and PJ even as well, was really alarming in that rate. So I'm interested to see what adjustment that is made going into game 5, because now it's a best of 3 at this point with the series tied at 2 games apiece, based on the fact that the Mavericks obviously lost in game number 4 and what that means. But I want to take it, before, we end the, a couple of positives that we want to talk about. But before we get there, Luka made some interesting comments, after the game was over with. Obviously Kyrie Irving, who had the 40 points in the game, him and Luka combining for 69. Luka had a 29, 10, and 10 triple-double. Of course, Kyrie Irving was spectacular, especially leading that comeback for the Mavericks again, as we mentioned, giving the Mavericks, the lead with just over 2 minutes left in the game. But Luka saying after the game that, he feels like he's letting, Kyrie Irving down a little bit, to which I felt like was a little unfair for him to put all of that on himself because of what, he's obviously dealing with from an injury standpoint. But I thought the comments were interesting, given how well, yes, Kyrie Irving's been playing, but maybe how Luka Doncic is feeling about his own play throughout the course of this series so far.
Yeah, definitely. I think typically that's why I'm definitely curious to see how he performs game 5 with the 2 days off, to kind of recharge his batteries, if you will, because there's a lot of points, like as someone who sees him like off the court, throughout like an 82 game season, where you're like, man, he took a beating today. And then like even some of these guys in general, like I genuinely was like, wow, Daniel Gafford looks very stiff like after game 2, like walking. And I'm like, that looks pretty tough to play this next game. He's questionable. I don't know about that. But then he literally has like a kid throw an alley-oop, looks like in the warm-up, looks like nothing happened. It's like, oh, wow, like he's definitely playing. So like definitely with Luka, having that, I guess you could say the chip on his shoulder of needing to have a quality, offensive performance. And also similarly, he's seen a lot of what the Clippers are going to be doing. They're doing very similar stuff, every game with, Terrence Mann being very physical. They're trying to weak him to the left side. He has to really work, using the ball screen, trying to snake into the gap if he wants to go right, all that stuff. Like he's seen a good amount of that. So he's going to, have that to be able to, leverage, think about it, have days to recover, and then, apply it, in LA. And, 2-2 series, everyone's going to be, highly motivated for that, I'm sure, on both sides. So definitely one of those things where I'm curious, in his overall like story as one of those like premier playoff performers, very curious to see, how that translates. And, Kyrie, like overall as well, too, like he's done a, phenomenal job, like gearing up for, moments, like kind of reading the situation of like, all right, now I really need to like go. Like now's my time to go. As simply as that. Like I'm going to push on the brake. I'm going to make a play, and I'm just going to be aggressive when the ball finds me. But, it's something that he, I thought was interesting. He said, I don't want to like quote him verbatim or anything like that, because I don't have it in front of me. I don't want to like butcher his quote either. But like he basically, gave an explanation of why, he didn't necessarily, come out of the gate aggressive or like pick up in the first quarter. He basically said he was trying to like, feel out the game, let the game come to him. And I'm curious to see, going forward, since it's the postseason and he knows like better than us with him being around Luka behind the scenes, if he needs to, elevate his own like aggression earlier in games. Definitely curious to see, how he approaches that. Cause I think, overall with him as an initiator, I think that it opens up a lot of things where, sometimes early in games, they are going to blitz him and get the ball out of his hands. So not to say that it's like, it's easy as like, just get the ball to Kyrie and just like, you're going to be perfectly fine, because there is calculus that goes into it. There's a reason why even when some teams, when he's running the bench unit, why he also still isn't like as aggressive as people may like in the regular season, because they are blitzing him when he's on the floor by himself without Luka and they're getting the ball out of his hands. So like there are little like games in the game like that kind of play into the overall like tendencies that he has as a scorer. But I am very curious to see, how he like kind of handles that. Is he going to be aggressive trying to turn the corner, beating the double team? Or the Mavericks going to try to maybe use a little bit of a different approach in their half court offense to get easier looks for Luka and for Kyrie, leveraging them on the floor? Or are they going to kind of like, keep using that similar approach that they have, like we talked about with the closing of the games? Like we know what to expect at this point with their approach. Is the execution going to kind of, I guess you could say, regress to the mean, if you will, from what we normally see from them offensively?
Yeah, the team is going to have to get off to a much better start in Game 5. We'll preview, that Game 5 throughout the course of the next couple of days. But that's my initial takeaway from Game 4 is you've got to get out to a better start. And I understand that Kyrie wants to be, a better reader of the game and understanding what he wants to do from an aggressive standpoint. But at the same time, when he decided to push that button to go ahead and go, he really turned the tone and the feel and obviously the score around in this game with his offensive aggressiveness, and really was able to put the Mavericks in position after everything they had been through in this game to still win. I would love to see that a little bit more early on, especially in Game 5, knowing that the Clippers, they played like the more desperate team in the final couple of minutes of this game. They came out hot, obviously. They took their foot off the gas pedal a little bit, but more so the Mavericks were able to force it off that gas pedal because of the way that they were playing offensively. How the first 5 minutes of game number 5 looks is going to be really interesting to see based off of what happened in this game and what kind of adjustments both Jason Kidd and Ty Lue are going to make going into Game 5. So over the next couple of days, both these teams are going to be licking their wounds a little bit. It's been a physical series, that buzzword that we love to use so far in this series. But at the same time, these two teams played, really in a lot of ways their best offensive game by far of the series, with the Clippers dropping the 116 points that they did, the Mavericks with 111 that they did in this game. I thought offensively both teams were really good, especially for the Mavericks in the second half. And we saw some pretty good offensive basketball. How those two teams will adjust in Game 5 will be huge from there. Last thoughts before we get out of here, Grant, on what you saw in Game 4 before we close down our episode here as we get ready for Game 5 on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think honestly, everything that we talked about, I think that pretty much covers the majority of it. Definitely curious to see the adjustments in Game 5, as you mentioned and we've talked about. Definitely fun to have that, back and forth with the the playoffs game by game, and definitely interesting to have one of the better series, the more entertaining ones around the NBA.
Yeah.
That's my main thought, because some of these are definitely not fantastic right now. So having the storyline of will Luka, kind of rise to the occasion, Game 5, four-time All-NBA, reigning NBA player. That's definitely, an interesting, intriguing thing in of itself. And I'm definitely curious. Sometimes it comes down to that, like some making shots, make or miss the league. Curious to see, if that's just going to be the adjustment. Like, will he have that superstar, level scoring performance that we are accustomed to seeing from him? And then also, can we get a little bit maybe of a look at what it looks like, if Kyrie Irving is more aggressive, or the focal point, I should say the focal point, because there's a difference between being aggressive and just being the focal point, like initiating the offense, being the one that commands the blitz, getting the ball out of his hands, or just, attacking if they aren't going to send the blitz. So definitely curious. I feel like that's something that, is kind of untapped potential in a way, where you can at least just give a different look how the Clippers are going to approach that, because they kind of have that progressionary, I guess you could say, template of what Dallas Mavericks offense and basketball looks like, where it's like, all right, for this segment of the game, usually this is what they're going to do. Like, you got to jumble that up at this point of the series with how, there hasn't been results, producing, and Luka's playing, through that right knee soreness. Or we look dumb 2 days later, 2 or 3 days later for now, because he has 2 days off, and
he goes for 40 in the game. Game 5.
We'll definitely be there to react to it. So definitely an exciting situation to be able to analyze as it kind of plays out.
Yeah, we definitely have the most entertaining of the first round series so far, with the Mavericks and Clippers tied at 2 games apiece. Grant, tell the folks where they can find you, where they can find your work, man.
Yeah, I have a lot of written content, throughout. If you want to hear more about Luka's injury or anything with the series analysis and comments, you can find that si.com/NBA/Mavericks, and I'll probably have a couple YouTube video breakdowns. I'm probably going to focus on how the Clippers have guarded Luka, so far, how Kyrie has been able to gear up, and also how the Mavericks have struggled handling the non-Kawhi Clippers. In those games 4-1 of this series, where they 2 losses of the series, they got off to those terrible starts that we talked about in detail, and definitely excited to be able to put that in a video format and show people like kind of those patterns and stuff. And some people like to say that the other coaching staff watches that sometimes and see all my comments, even though they don't need to hear from me or hear any thoughts I have. So I might have to post that at a time where I can't have the Clippers scouting department turning my notifications on and learning from me. So we'll see when I post it, though.
There you go. There you go. You make sure you take care of that on the way when you're doing that stuff. So looking forward to that coverage and obviously what you got going on there. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavs podcast. And you can find me on YouTube as well at Kevin Gray Sports. Make sure you like and comment on the video and subscribe to the channel as well. And subscribe to Grant's channel as well at Grant Afseth. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Really appreciate you joining us here on this latest episode as we recap what happened and react to what happened in Game 4 between the Mavericks and the Clippers. We'll have more episodes throughout the course of the week as we get you ready for Game 5 on Wednesday as the Mavericks and the Clippers get ready for that pivotal game in Los Angeles before the series moves back to Dallas on Friday for game number 6. That is it for this episode. For Grant Afseth, my name is Kevin Gray. Appreciate you joining us here on Inside the Mavs, and make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Until then, we'll talk to you later. Peace.